What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions video. Now today, as you can tell, we are going to be taking a look at the Detroit Lions Week 12 matchup as the Houston Texans come to town on Thanksgiving Day and try to defeat our 7-3 Detroit Lions. Now, before we do get into the video, if you are enjoying the content and are new to the channel, consider liking the videos, subscribing to the channel, and sharing it with a Lions or an NFL fan. If we could hit 115 subs by tomorrow, which is my birthday, I would be very appreciative. We are only 3 subs away, so if you want to, give me a little birthday present, I guess, I would be very appreciative if you would consider subscribing to the channel. But with that being said, let's get into our Week 12 matchup versus these Houston Texans and see if this is a very winnable game for the Detroit Lions. Now, as I mentioned, the Houston Texans are coming to town on Thanksgiving, and just like the Panthers, we did not play them last year. So I wanted to take a look at the offensive and defensive stats and kind of see how we stack up against the Texans as far as last year before we look at additions, subtractions, and matchups. Now, the Houston Texans last year, just like the Lions, were not really elite in anything offensively. To me, elite means top 5, and neither team was able to get top 5 in any category offensively. The Houston Texans totaled 5,792 total yards, which ranked 13th. They passed for 3,783 yards, which ranked 15th, 27 touchdowns, which was tied for 12th, 14 interceptions, which ranked 13th in the NFL. They rushed for 2,009 yards, which ranked 9th, and rushed for 17 rushing touchdowns. Now, as you can see, they didn't really do anything spectacularly. Their rushing yards were ranked 9th, but I don't want to say that doesn't count. However, Deshaun Watson is a very mobile quarterback. He takes off on occasion and picks up a couple hundred yards a season. So I don't want to say, all I'm trying to say with that is that is not all on the running backs. Deshaun Watson puts quite a few yards into that rushing total also, which Matthew Stafford doesn't do. Now, looking at the Detroit Lions offense, they had 5,549 total yards, which ranked 17th, 3,900 passing yards, which ranked 10th, 18 passing touchdowns, which ranked 10th, and 15 interceptions, which was the 12th most in the NFL. Now, looking at the rushing side of the ball for the Lions, they rushed for 1,649 yards, which ranked 21st, and they had rushed for 7 rushing touchdowns, which ranked 29th. So the Detroit Lions were much more of a pass-heavy offense than the Houston Texans. They were top 10, which I said is very good, but as I mentioned, it is not quite that top 5, not quite that elite standard that everybody's hoping to get. However, Matthew Stafford did miss 8 games last season. So if he had stayed healthy, I would expect us to be in that elite passing game for last year. However, he wasn't, so I can't say that we were elite at that. Now, moving over to the defensive side of the ball, Houston's defense was almost as bad as Detroit's. They gave up 6,213 total yards, which ranked 28th in the NFL. 4,276 of those were passing yards. That ranked 29th. They gave up 33 passing touchdowns, which was tied for 27th, and they only had 12 interceptions, which was tied for 17th. Now, they gave up 1,937 rushing yards, which ranked 25th, and 12 rushing touchdowns, which ranked 9th. So their defense was very, very bad last year, except for the rushing touchdowns allowed, which was, not very bad. Obviously, ranking 9th in the NFL is not horrible. Just like the Detroit Lions only gave up 13 rushing touchdowns instead of the Houston Texans 12. Those were the only things that these defenses really did well. The Detroit Lions defense, as we've said before, gave up 6,406 yards, ranking 31st in the NFL. They gave up 4,551 passing yards, which was last in the NFL. 33 touchdowns, just like the Texans, tied for 27th. They only had 7 interceptions last year, which was tied for 30th. They gave up 1,855 rushing yards, which ranked 21st, and 13 rushing touchdowns, which ranked 14th. So, as I said, both these defenses were very, very bad. Both secondaries were horrible, and as we're going to see in a second, one team really tried to fix the secondary, and one team really did not. So, looking at key losses for each individual team, we'll start with the Detroit Lions as we can go quick through that because we've talked about it before. We lost Darius Slay, Rashawn Melvin, and Devon Kennard, all role players, all impact players for the Detroit Lions last year. None of them are here. Obviously, 2 of those players being in the secondary. I mentioned them because I think that this game will turn into a shootout. Now, the Texans lost a couple really big name players, but outside those big name players, they didn't lose a whole lot of starters. Now, they lost DJ Reader and obviously the great DeAndre Hopkins. And those two players are going to be detrimental. Those two players were stars for that team. They put up big numbers. They really helped drive that team to succeed in that last year. And neither one is there. Obviously, DJ Reader left in free agency to go to Cincinnati, and DeAndre Hopkins was given away for pretty much nothing to the Arizona Cardinals. And now I still do not know how Bill O'Brien thought trading DeAndre Hopkins for a second and the corpse of David Johnson was a good idea in any way, shape, or form. But it happened. It's over. It is official. DeAndre Hopkins is no longer a Texan, which I would be excited about if we didn't have to play him 9 weeks earlier as a Arizona Cardinal. But, he is no longer there, so we don't have to worry about him and Deshaun Watson carving up our secondary anymore. And I think he was obviously the biggest loss for them. Now, looking at key additions, as we've gone over several times for the Lions, they added Jeffrey Okudah, Desmond Trufant, and Duron Harmon in the secondary to try to bolster that secondary. So maybe the Lions linebackers can blitz more, or they can just hold up to get coverage sacks more often. Now, looking at additions by the Houston Texans, they added Brandon Cooks, who I will say is not DeAndre Hopkins, but he's not a bad wide receiver. He has 4 1,000-yard receiving seasons under his belt. He's a NFL veteran, has a little bit of injury concerns here and there, but nothing crazy, nothing season-ending for him in his career as far as I know. And he's been a very productive wide receiver when he has been on the field for any team he's played for. I don't know why he's been traded so many times. He's been traded for like 3 first-round picks in his career and a second, I believe, by the Houston Texans. He doesn't seem to have any character concerns. He doesn't get injured all that often. He is very productive when he's on the field. So I'm not sure why he's always the one getting traded, but that is just how it seems to be in his career. Now, they also went out and signed Randall Cobb to a pretty big deal, which I didn't think was a very good contract, but he's not a horrible wide receiver. And then Javon Hargraves, the cornerback who was cut from the Buccaneers last offseason, was also signed by the Houston Texans. Now, I think a huge matchup is going to be can our quarterbacks hold up against their wide receivers? As I mentioned, the Texans traded DeAndre Hopkins in a boneheaded trade by Bill O'Brien, but they still have Brandon Cooks, who, as I mentioned, has 4 1,000-yard receiving seasons. They have Will Fuller, who, when he is healthy, can take the top off of defense and can be very productive. They signed Randall Cobb, who is, maybe not an elite wide receiver, maybe not even a very good, but he's a very serviceable slot wide receiver. They still have Kenny Stills, who has never gotten 1,000 yards, but he's been very close before. Is good for 500-600 yards a season and 5 to 6 touchdowns. The wide receiver core isn't completely gone. It's not like DeAndre Hopkins made that receiving core great. He definitely elevated it. He definitely made it greater. But even without DeAndre Hopkins, I still think this receiving core is a very solid one. Now, the only problem is health. Obviously, Brandon Cooks has missed a few games in his career. Will Fuller seems to have injury concerns. There's just a lot of guys that can't stay healthy for a full season for the Houston Texans, but obviously it would be impossible to predict injuries. So in this prediction, they are all playing. Now, if we flip that on its head, right, and we move over to the Detroit Lions wide receivers versus the Houston Texans secondary, as we mentioned earlier, the Houston Texans secondary is very poor. They gave up almost as many yards and the same amount of touchdowns as the Detroit Lions. However, the Houston Texans lost Tayshaun Gibson, who had 3 interceptions for them and led the team in interceptions, Jaleel Adai, who had 2 for them, and Jonathan Joseph, who had 1. Now, they really only brought in Javon Hargraves to replace him. And while Javon isn't a horrible cornerback, he's definitely, I don't think he's going to get you 3 interceptions. Conley, who they traded for last season, did not have an interception last year, but I think a full offseason, I think that he will improve, but I don't think he's an elite cornerback. I just think that this secondary is one that Matthew Stafford could take advantage of on a Thanksgiving Day. Just every couple of years, it seems like Matthew Stafford and the wide receivers go off on Thanksgiving for a ton of yards, a ton of touchdowns, and they just make them pay. And that could definitely happen. But, however, the overall record as far as these two teams playing is 3-1 to the Houston Texans. The Detroit Lions have only beaten the Texans 1 time in their franchise history, and that was in 2004. They have not won since. They've been 0-3 since 2004, and they just have not played the Houston Texans very well in this matchup's history. Now, should they have won a couple games, the Arian Foster, where his arm was down, they probably should have won that game as they went into overtime, and without the touchdown, the Detroit Lions win in regulation. But that did not happen. we have to roll with the punches. We can't complain about the refs as right now as far as that game, because that game's been over for almost a decade now, and it's in the past. And should they have won the game? Maybe, but they didn't. They are currently 1-3 against the Texans. They don't play very good, and the Texans have never had a quarterback like Deshaun Watson before. We have never played the Texans when they have had an elite quarterback like Deshaun Watson. And even though I'm not in love with the Texans roster, I think their record showed that they were a better team than they were last year. I don't think they were, good enough to contend for a title like some people thought. I think next year they will take a step back. However, if you have a quarterback like Deshaun Watson, your team always has a chance. It's kind of like the Lions with Matthew Stafford. No matter how bad their team is if number 9 Matthew Stafford or number 4 Deshaun Watson is quarterbacking your team, you have a chance every single Sunday, Thursday, or Monday night that you play the game. Now, I don't love the Texans roster. I know they have a pretty good pass rushing duo with the J.J. Watt and Whitney Merciless. I just can't shake the feeling that the Lions are going to lose this game. As I said, Deshaun Watson keeps the Texans in every single game. He elevates them to playoff contention even when they probably shouldn't be. And I just can't shake the feeling that the Detroit Lions are going to lose this game against the Houston Texans, even with all the big name losses for the Texans, even with, that defense being very bad. I think this will be a shootout. I think Matthew Stafford will put up very good yards. It's all comes down to a feeling, and that's really what this series is a prediction. And some of that prediction has to go off feeling. And just in my heart, I can't shake a feeling that the Houston Texans are going to take this one. Even if it seems like the Detroit Lions should win this game, Deshaun Watson is going to find a way to hang around and defeat the Detroit Lions on Thanksgiving, ruining everybody's Thanksgiving in Detroit again. But, that's just how it goes. Sometimes you lose games you're supposed to win, and sometimes you win games you're not. So I think that this is just a game that the Lions are going to drop for some reason. I can't give you a good reason. I just feel it in my heart, and that's the only way that I can relay this information. So I think the Lions lose this game. I think they are currently 7-4 as far as my predictions go. Not a horrible record. You're hoping to see a little bit better, but at this point, 7-4 is looking pretty good to get into the playoffs. And, they lose this game here, but I think that they're going to come back and win a couple more before the season is over. So with that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. If you are new to the channel, as I mentioned, consider subscribing, liking videos, and sharing it with a Lions or an NFL fan that you think would enjoy it. Let's get to 115 subs by my birthday. Make my day tomorrow when I wake up. And, I would just be very appreciative for that. But with that being said, that is all I have for you today. I hope everybody watching this has an absolutely fantastic day. If you disagree and think the Houston Texans are no match for our Detroit Lions on Thanksgiving in Ford Field, obviously let me know. I think it could go either way. I just, as I said, have a feeling that Deshaun Watson is going to keep the Texans in it and score a game-winning touchdown at the end. But obviously that could not happen. I have no idea. I'm just a 17-year-old kid making YouTube videos, so what do I know? But, if you disagree, obviously leave it in the comments. Leave in the comments why you think the Lions can win, or if I missed something on why the Texans are going to win by more than I'm giving them credit for. But, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you all so very much for watching. I will see everybody later. Bye, guys.